You have carried the burdens of others for so long that you have begun to mistake them for your own. The empath is born not out of pure choice, but often out of necessity. Childhood itself, with its subtle cruelties and invisible wounds, forges a certain soul who learns to survive by feeling everything around them, as if the only way to remain alive is to become a mirror for the environment. You thought it was love, you thought it was kindness, but in truth, it was a survival strategy, a quiet pact with the shadows of those who raised you. The empath is not merely a personality type, it is an archetypal wound made flesh. The echo of an ancient story in which you once learned that peace would come only if you absorb the storms of others. But there comes a moment in the life of every empath when the soul begins to resist, the body grows weary of housing the chaos of others, the heart grows tired of carrying pain that does not belong to it. And in this rebellion of the inner being, you discover that the deepest choice is no longer between rejection and belonging, but between people and peace. The unconscious has waited for this hour, preparing you to confront a truth that can no longer be denied, that peace is not found in the approval of others, but in the sacred center of your own being. Do you see how the psyche arranges its dramas? You meet the same faces in different masks, the same betrayals in different voices, the same disappointments dressed in new clothing. Again and again, the pattern repeats until you awaken. This is the archetypal law of recurrence, the compulsion to repeat until the soul learns what it has forgotten. For the empath, the forgotten truth is simple. You are not responsible for the storms that others conjure. Yet the unconscious will send you endless teachers, partners, friends, family members who demand your endless sacrifice. They come not because fate is cruel, but because your shadow insists that you must finally confront the prison you once built for yourself. When you dream, perhaps you see water, it floods the house, or you are drowning, or you are trying desperately to rescue others from the waves. This is the image of your unconscious crying out, showing you that you are submerged not in your own emotions, but in the tides of the collective. The water is not yours, yet you drink from it as though it were your lifeblood. If you interpret the dream only as fear, you miss its power. The dream is a mirror, whispering that you must rise above the flood, that you must find the dry land of your own soul. The archetype of the Savior haunts the empath. To feel deeply is to imagine that you can redeem those who are broken, but what you call redemption often becomes possession. You do not rescue the other, you drown with them. And then the unconscious punishes you with resentment, with exhaustion, with a growing bitterness that corrodes the very compassion that once defined you. You think you are failing in love, but in truth, you are being summoned toward individuation, the process by which the self must separate from the illusions of the persona and the demands of the collective. Peace, then, is not a simple choice, it is a tearing apart, a death of an old identity. The empath who chooses peace is not merely withdrawing from people, they are withdrawing from the compulsion to save, from the archetype of martyrdom, from the old shadow binding contracts that once defined their very worth. And this withdrawal is terrifying, for it feels like betrayal. You fear that without sacrifice you will not be loved. You fear that without carrying the wounds of others, you will no longer belong. But let me tell you, this fear is not the voice of truth. It is the echo of childhood, the voice of an earlier wound, the ghost of a forgotten night when your tears were silenced, when your needs were swallowed so that others might continue unchallenged. I speak to you not only as a psychologist, but as a mystic who has watched the human soul wander the labyrinth of its own illusions. To choose peace is to choose death, death of an image, death of a role, death of the savior complex. And yet, from this death comes resurrection. When you no longer carry the burden of the other, you finally feel the weight of your own soul. And it is heavy, yes, but it is real. You discover that beneath the endless storms of others, there was always a still place within you, a temple untouched by chaos. The alchemists called it the lapis, the stone of wholeness. To find it is to discover that peace was never given by the collective. It was always born from the marriage of your own opposites. When the empath finally chooses peace over people, something strange happens. At first, the outer world rebels. Friends accuse you of selfishness. Family members call you cold. Lovers say you are distant. They do not recognize that you are undergoing transformation, for transformation threatens the contracts by which they once bound you. This is the crucifixion of the empath. You are nailed by misunderstanding, by rejection, by the wrath of those who depended upon your endless sacrifice. And yet, in this crucifixion lies the path to resurrection. For if you endure the loneliness of peace, you will awaken to a new kingdom within. Let me tell you of a dream. A woman once told me she dreamed of carrying a heavy basket of stones on her back. She walked through a forest, bent double beneath the weight. Each stone bore the face of someone she knew: her mother, her father, her husband, her children. At last, she collapsed, unable to go further. As she fell, the stones spilled onto the ground, and to her amazement, they began to grow roots, to sprout into trees, to rise into a forest of life. She realized she had been carrying not stones but seeds, and they were never meant to remain on her back. They needed to be planted. Do you see? The empath's burden, when laid down, becomes life not only for the self, but for others. By refusing to carry, you give back to others the weight that was always theirs to bear. And in doing so, you allow them to grow. Peace is not withdrawal from love. Peace is love, purified of compulsion. When you no longer help others because you must, you begin to help because you can. No longer is your gift poisoned by resentment or exhaustion. You give from fullness, not from lack. And this is the paradox. When the empath finally chooses peace over people, they become capable of true love for the first time. Yet the path is narrow, and the shadows are fierce. The archetype of guilt rises like a dragon, whispering that you have betrayed your nature, but guilt is often the guardian of transformation. It appears to test your courage, to ensure that you are ready to pass through the threshold. Do not run from it. Face it. Ask it, whose voice is this? Who told me that to rest is selfish? Who convinced me that my worth depends upon my sacrifice? You will find the answer in forgotten rooms of your childhood, in silent moments when your needs were dismissed, and when you see the origin, the guilt begins to dissolve, for you realize it was never your own voice, but the shadow of another living inside you. I tell you, the choice for peace is a sacred rebellion. It is the moment the empath ceases to be a servant of others' shadows and begins to serve the self, the divine center within. Jung called it individuation. The mystics called it union with God. The alchemists called it the conjunctio. Whatever the name, it is the same mystery, the return to wholeness. The decision for peace does not arrive in a single thunderclap, but often creeps in silently, as though the soul begins to whisper truths that the conscious mind can no longer silence. At first, the empath feels a vague unease. Conversations that once seemed necessary now leave a bitter aftertaste. Friendships that once felt warm now demand more than they give. You notice that your body rebels with fatigue, that your spirit grows dim after hours of attending to others. This is not random exhaustion, it is your psyche's protest. The unconscious begins to insist that the drama must end, that you cannot forever be the chalice for another's poison. And so you are confronted with a paradox. The same sensitivity that once preserved you now threatens to destroy you. What once made you belong now isolates you. This is how the psyche arranges initiation. It turns the gift into a wound, the blessing into a burden, so that you may be compelled to grow beyond it. When you finally see that your empathy has been hijacked by archetypal forces, the martyr, the savior, the scapegoat, you stand at the threshold of liberation. But liberation demands that you betray the role you once played, and betrayal is always terrifying. In this stage, dreams become louder. Perhaps you see yourself in a crowded marketplace, surrounded by shouting voices, each person tugging at your arm, demanding your attention. You wake with a feeling of suffocation, not because the dream is merely symbolic, but because your unconscious is staging for you the reality you have been living unconsciously. The psyche speaks in images, in theater, in living metaphors, and when you ignore its whispers, it begins to shout. To heed such a dream is to acknowledge that you have been sold into slavery, not by others alone, but by your own compliance with their demands. It is here that shadow work becomes indispensable. You must ask yourself why you are so devoted to carrying what is not yours. Beneath the compassion lies something darker, a fear of abandonment, a terror of being seen as selfish, a dread of the void that appears when you are no longer needed. To love peace more than people is to let these shadows rise, to admit that your giving was never purely selfless. It was entangled with your need to be seen, with your hunger to be loved, with your terror of being discarded. This realization is not condemnation, but liberation. For only when you admit the shadow of your empathy can you begin to love in freedom. The collective resists this awakening. Society glorifies the giver, the martyr, the one who bends. We canonize those who sacrifice and condemn those who choose solitude. The empath then is doubly imprisoned by the inner shadow and by the outer morality. But remember, morality is often a mask for the collective's fear of transformation. The world does not want you to awaken because your awakening threatens its contracts. When you no longer comply, others must face their own shadows, their own responsibilities, and so they accuse you not because you are wrong, but because you are dangerous. Do not be deceived by their outrage. Every accusation is an unconscious confession. When they call you selfish, it is their own unacknowledged selfishness speaking. When they call you cold, it is their own repressed coldness revealed. To choose peace is to become a mirror, and mirrors are always feared. Jung once said that people will do anything to avoid facing their own souls, and your refusal to carry them forces them into that confrontation. Thus, your act of peace becomes revolutionary, not only for yourself, but for the entire web of relations around you. Consider the archetype of the Christ. Many imagine him as endlessly forgiving, endlessly sacrificing. Yet his story is one of sacred withdrawal. He often departed to the mountains alone, leaving behind the multitudes who clamored for healing. He said no to the demands of kings, priests, even friends, and in the end, he was crucified, not for what he gave, but for what he refused to surrender to the domination of the collective will. In this sense, Christ is not merely the Savior archetype, but the individuated self, showing us that true compassion flows not from endless sacrifice, but from union with the divine center. To follow this path is to walk the same narrow road of peace over people, solitude over the crowd. The empath who awakens often feels torn between two worlds. The outer world demands compliance, while the inner world whispers of stillness. At first, you may oscillate, retreating for a time, then returning to old patterns, then retreating again. This is not failure, it is initiation. Transformation is not linear, but dialectical. The psyche pulls you into extremes until you find the synthesis. One day you say yes too much, another day you say no too harshly. Slowly, you learn to anchor yourself in balance, not as a servant, not as a stone, but as a living center. Yet beware of the false peace that is merely withdrawal born of bitterness. To shut yourself away from people in anger is not the same as choosing peace. One is avoidance, the other is integration. True peace does not fear contact with others, but neither does it collapse beneath their weight. It is the calm center that can meet the world without being consumed by it. This is why individuation is so difficult. It requires that you remain in the world yet not of it. To love without dissolving, to stand firm without hardening. Let us speak of symbols. The empath is often haunted by the image of the wounded animal, a bird with a broken wing, a dog limping in the street, a child lost in the dark. These images reveal the archetype of the wounded other, calling forth your instinct to save. But when such images appear repeatedly, they point to your own soul. The bird is you, the dog is you, the child is you. You project your own wound outward because you cannot yet bear to hold it within. By rescuing others, you attempt to rescue the forgotten child within yourself, but the unconscious is merciful. It shows you again and again that what you seek to heal outside is a mirror of what waits to be healed inside. Peace comes when you turn that gaze inward, when you cradle your own broken bird, instead of chasing every shadow in the world. This is not narcissism, as some will accuse, but the deepest responsibility for until you heal your own wound, you will only repeat it in others. To choose peace is to finally rescue yourself, to become the parent your inner child always needed, to cease outsourcing your salvation to the suffering of others. The alchemists described this stage as the nigredo, the blackening, the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when the old structures collapse, when your identity as savior, martyr, empath disintegrates. It feels like death, because it is death, the death of an old psychic form. But in this blackness lies the seed of transformation. From nigredo comes albedo, the whitening, the first taste of peace. You awaken to mornings unburdened, to silences that no longer terrify you, to relationships that no longer define your worth. The soul begins to glow not from the borrowed fires of others, but from its own hidden flame. And yet, this journey has no final end. Peace is not a permanent state, but a continual choice. Again and again, you will be tempted to return to the old patterns. Again and again, faces will appear that call forth your old compulsion, but now you will see them differently. You will recognize the archetypal pull the shadows demand, and you will pause. In that pause lies your freedom. To pause is to choose consciously, no longer enslaved by the unconscious repetition. This is the heart of individuation, to bring into the light what once ruled you from the dark. So when the empath finally chooses peace over people, they do not cease to love. They begin to love. Truly, they no longer give from fear. They no longer rescue to avoid abandonment. They give because love overflows, because peace makes generosity effortless. This love does not bind, it liberates. It does not possess, it blesses. And this is the paradox the world cannot understand, that by withdrawing from its demands, you return with a love purer than it has ever known. The dreams continue to whisper, and if you listen closely, you will hear that they are not merely private stories, but messages from the collective unconscious. An empath's dreams often bear the weight of entire lineages. You may find yourself in an ancient battlefield, carrying wounded soldiers upon your back. You may see a mother crying for her lost child, though you have never known her. You may stand in a burning village, running from flames that seem older than memory. These are not random hallucinations of the night. They are images that emerge when the personal unconscious overlaps with the archetypal. You are shown that your burden is not simply yours, but centuries old, woven into the inheritance of humanity itself. To be an empath is, in some sense, to be porous. The walls between self and other are thin, so that the collective bleeds into you. You absorb not only the wounds of those you love, but the ancestral pain that courses invisibly through generations. And here lies the danger. To live as though you must carry what the entire lineage could not. The unconscious, however, does not torment you for cruelty. It shows you these archetypal images so that you might awaken to the truth that no one can carry them all. What you are called to carry is your own soul, nothing more. The rest must be laid down at the feet of the mystery, returned to the dark earth from which it came. Do you see now why choosing peace feels like betrayal? It is because, at a hidden level, you are breaking not only your personal contracts, but ancestral ones. The family that taught you to absorb, the generations that survived through silence and sacrifice, live within you as voices. And when you step away, they cry out in protest. You feel guilt not only for disappointing the living, but for betraying the dead. But let me tell you, the truest way to honor the ancestors is not to repeat their wound, but to bring it to consciousness and release it. In your choice for peace, you become the one who ends the cycle, the one who dares to break the inheritance of endless carrying. Imagine a dream where you are in a dark cathedral, heavy with incense and shadows. You kneel before an altar, and upon it lies a great book. You open the pages and find them blank, waiting for your hand. This is the symbol of individuation. It is the moment when you cease to live as a character in the ancestral story and begin to write your own. Choosing peace is like opening that book. It feels empty at first, terrifying in its blankness, but it is yours, no longer written by the needs of others, no longer dictated by the shadows of the past, but waiting for your own voice. Archetypally, this is a rebellion of the hero against the collective. Every myth speaks of it. Prometheus steals fire from the gods. Moses walks away from Pharaoh. The Buddha leaves the palace. Each story is different, yet the essence is the same. One must leave the collective demands in order to awaken the self. And so the empath, who has always been chained to the collective through emotional servitude, must one day break the chains, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Without it, the soul withers, the self remains unborn. But beware, the unconscious has its own guardians. When you attempt to free yourself, figures will arise both inwardly and outwardly to oppose you. Inwardly, you may dream of jailers, of beasts that block the path, of serpents that coil around your feet.